The warm glow of chandeliers reflected off the polished marble floors of Le Grand Royal, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. It was the kind of place where reservations were booked months in advance, where the wealthy dined in hushed luxury, and where the staff was trained to provide impeccable service, at least most of them were. Among the waitstaff, Trevor, a young but cocky server, prided himself on spotting real rich people. He had worked here long enough to know the types, the old money elites who ordered expensive wines without looking at the price, the socialites who took 1,000,000 photos before touching their food, and the business moguls who tipped generously, expecting nothing less than perfection. Trevor had also developed a habit of judging customers based on their appearance. If someone looked out of place, wearing simple clothes, acting too casual, he assumed they didn't belong. And if they didn't belong, they weren't worth his effort. That's why when a broad-shouldered man in a hoodie and sneakers strolled into the restaurant alone, Trevor barely glanced at him. The man looked ordinary, too ordinary for a place like this. No tailored suit, no flashy jewelry. "Table for one?" the man asked, in a deep, confident voice. Trevor smirked, giving him a once-over. "Sir, are you sure you're in the right place?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. The man chuckled, unbothered. "Pretty sure you got a table or not?" Trevor sighed dramatically. "Fine, I suppose we do have a seat available." Instead of leading him to a prime spot near the panoramic windows overlooking the city skyline, Trevor took him to the farthest corner, next to the kitchen doors, where the air smelled of dish soap and overheated oil. "Here you go, best seat in the house," Trevor said with a sarcastic grin. The man raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. Instead, he calmly took his seat. "Appreciate it," he said, his tone unreadable. Trevor didn't even bother handing him a menu. "I'll be back when you're ready to order, but, just so you know, our cheapest dish is $75. Wouldn't want any surprises." He walked off without waiting for a response, already dismissing the man in his mind. Probably a lost tourist who wandered in, he thought. He'd be gone in 5 minutes, embarrassed by the prices. But Trevor had no idea who he had just insulted, and soon he would learn, very soon. Trevor sauntered back toward the main dining area, completely dismissing the man he had just seated in the worst spot in the restaurant. He turned his attention to a well-dressed couple at a table near the window, a man in a sharp navy suit and a woman in an elegant red dress, both sipping wine that probably cost more than Trevor's entire paycheck. "Sir, madam, how is everything this evening?" Trevor asked, his tone suddenly smooth and professional. "Delightful," the woman said, barely looking at him. That's how it was with real wealth, Trevor thought. Effortless. They didn't have to try. Then out of the corner of his eye, he noticed something strange. The man in the hoodie, the one he had dismissed, was completely at ease. He wasn't fidgeting with the menu in shock at the prices. He wasn't nervously checking his phone as if he had made a mistake walking in. Instead, he was leaning back in his chair, scrolling through his phone, completely unfazed. Trevor frowned. Was the guy actually planning to eat here? Curious, he made his way back to the corner table. "So, have you decided?" he asked, his voice still laced with arrogance. The man didn't even look up. "Yeah, I'll take the Wagyu steak, medium rare." Trevor stifled a laugh. The Wagyu, that was one of the most expensive dishes on the menu, over $300 just for the steak. "Sir," Trevor said, trying to sound polite but failing, "perhaps you'd like to try something a bit simpler? The soup of the day is excellent and much more affordable." This time, the man looked up, his sharp eyes locking on to Trevor's. There was something in his gaze, something powerful, something unreadable, that made Trevor hesitate for the first time. "I said Wagyu," the man repeated, "and bring me a glass of your best red wine to go with it." Trevor forced a smile, though inside he was practically screaming. Who did this guy think he was? "Of course," he said, through clenched teeth. "Coming right up." As he walked toward the kitchen, he muttered under his breath, "Let's see how you react when you see the bill." The whispering begins back in the main dining area. A few other waiters were starting to notice something. "Hey, isn't that—" one of them murmured to another, glancing toward the corner table. "No way, what would he be doing here, dressed like that?" Trevor heard snippets of their conversation, but didn't pay much attention. He was too focused on making sure this arrogant customer learned his lesson. The chef raised an eyebrow when Trevor placed the order. "Wagyu steak? Who's ordering that?" "Some nobody who thinks he can afford it," Trevor scoffed. "Don't worry, he'll be gone once he sees the bill." But the chef looked skeptical. He turned toward the dining area, caught sight of the customer, and his face went pale. "Are you out of your mind?" the chef hissed. "Do you even know who that is?" Trevor blinked. Some broke guy pretending to be rich?" The chef shook his head furiously. "Dude, that's Big Shaq." Trevor froze. "What?" Big Shaq, the multimillionaire, the basketball legend, the guy who owns businesses, car dealerships, and probably this whole damn city. Trevor's stomach dropped. He turned slowly, looking back toward the man in the hoodie, who was now casually tapping away on his phone, completely unaware of the chaos his presence was starting to cause. Trevor's arrogance melted into panic. If what the chef was saying was true, he had just insulted and disrespected one of the most powerful men in the country. And worse. Shaq knew exactly what Trevor had done. Trevor's mind raced as he stood, frozen near the kitchen doors, his heart hammering against his ribs. Big Shaq. He had just mocked and disrespected one of the most powerful men in sports and business without even realizing it. For the first time that evening, Trevor felt something unfamiliar. Fear. His arrogance, his overconfidence, all of it seemed ridiculous now. What if Shaq complained? What if he got fired? Worse, what if Shaq's influence could ruin his entire career in hospitality? Trevor turned back toward the table, suddenly hyper-aware of how badly he had treated him. The sarcastic tone, the dismissive glances, the terrible seating choice, it all replayed in his head like a nightmare. And then something even more terrifying happened. Shaq looked up. For the first time since ordering, Shaq met Trevor's gaze directly, and it was like being pinned under an invisible weight. His expression wasn't angry, wasn't hostile, but there was something in his eyes, something that said, "I know exactly what you did." A desperate attempt at redemption. Trevor snapped into action, scrambling to fix his mistake. He rushed back to the table with a forced smile, suddenly trying to act as if everything was normal. "Sir, I just wanted to make sure you're comfortable." His voice cracked slightly, but he forced himself to continue. "Actually, we have a much better table available, right by the window. Would you prefer that?" Shaq raised an eyebrow. "You mean the ones you give to your VIP guests?" Trevor's face burned with embarrassment. Yes, exactly. It's just, I didn't realize before, but of course you're more than welcome to the best seat in the house." Shaq smirked. "No thanks. This one's fine." Trevor swallowed hard. He could feel the other waiters and the manager watching from the sidelines, whispering among themselves. He needed to do something, anything, to make up for his rudeness. "Would you like anything else? An appetizer? Maybe a special drink on the house?" Trevor asked, his voice an octave higher than usual. Shaq tapped his chin, pretending to think. Then he gave Trevor a small, knowing smile. "Nah, I think I'll stick to my order." Trevor nodded so fast his neck almost hurt. "Of course, sir. Right away, sir." He practically ran back to the kitchen. The head chef gave him a death glare. You better pray he doesn't report you to the manager. Trevor didn't reply. He was too busy freaking out. The bill arrives, and the lesson begins. By the time the Wagyu steak was served, cooked to perfection, Trevor had transformed from an arrogant waiter into an overly eager servant. He hovered nearby, waiting for any sign of dissatisfaction. But Shaq? He ate calmly, enjoying every bite, never once bringing up the earlier insult. Trevor couldn't tell if this was a good thing or a bad thing. Then came the moment he had dreaded the most, the bill. He placed the leather check holder gently on the table. "Here's your bill, sir. Take your time." Shaq opened it and glanced at the total, a $600 bill. Trevor held his breath. Would he complain? Would he call the manager and expose everything? But instead of anger, Shaq just smiled. He pulled out his card, slid it into the holder, and signed the receipt without hesitation. Trevor exhaled in relief until he saw the tip amount. The tip that changed everything. Trevor's jaw nearly hit the floor. Shaq had left him a $5,000 tip. $5,000. His hands trembled as he looked up at Shaq, completely speechless. Sir, Shaq leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "Let me guess, you're wondering why I tipped you that much after how you treated me?" Trevor nodded slowly, his throat dry. Shaq chuckled. "Because this is a lesson. Not for me, for you." Trevor swallowed hard. "A lesson?" Shaq's eyes locked onto his. "You judged me the second I walked in, assumed I didn't belong, treated me like garbage because I wasn't dressed like your usual rich customers." Trevor felt his stomach twist in shame. Shaq leaned back and shrugged. "I don't need to be flashy. I know what I got. But you let your arrogance decide how you treated someone without even knowing who they were." Trevor felt like he was sinking into the floor. Shaq grabbed his phone and stood up, towering over Trevor. $5,000 is my way of saying, fix your attitude before you mess up something bigger than just a restaurant job. And with that, he walked toward the exit, leaving Trevor standing there, completely humbled. For the first time in his life, Trevor understood the true cost of arrogance, and he would never make that mistake again. Trevor stood frozen, gripping the leather check holder as if it were the last thing anchoring him to reality. His eyes kept darting back to the receipt, $5,000. It didn't make sense. Why would Shaq reward him after he had been so disrespectful? The other waiters and even the manager had gathered near the bar, whispering and throwing shocked glances his way. None of them had ever seen a tip like that before. Trevor's hands trembled as he ran through everything Shaq had just told him. You judged me the second I walked in. Fix your attitude before you mess up something bigger than just a restaurant job. He felt a deep, sharp pang of shame. This wasn't just about one bad shift. This was about who he was as a person. For years, Trevor had looked down on people, deciding their worth based on clothes, appearance, and first impressions. He had convinced himself that only the right kind of people deserved respect. And now he had just been taught the most expensive lesson of his life. A quiet reflection. After Shaq left, the restaurant felt different. Trevor moved like a robot, finishing the rest of his shift in a daze. Every customer he served after that, he caught himself thinking, am I judging them right now? Am I making the same mistake again? For the first time, he saw people instead of price tags. By the time the last table was cleared, the manager approached him. Trevor, my office, now. Trevor nodded weakly, knowing this conversation was inevitable. Facing the consequences. Inside the small, dimly lit office, the manager folded his arms. "I don't even know where to begin," he sighed, shaking his head. "You're lucky Shaq didn't file a complaint." Trevor sat stiffly, feeling the weight of his mistake. "I know. I messed up." The manager scoffed. "Messed up? That's an understatement." He leaned forward. "I don't run this place so people like you can decide who deserves good service and who doesn't." Trevor swallowed hard, staring at the desk. "If you weren't one of my top servers, I'd fire you on the spot." The manager's voice was firm. "But I think you learned something more valuable than just losing a job tonight." Trevor looked up, surprised. The manager leaned back in his chair. "Take the next few days off. Think about what happened. When you come back, I want a completely different attitude." Trevor nodded slowly. "I will. I promise." A different man. That night, Trevor sat at home, staring at the $5,000 tip. He thought about all the times he had judged people unfairly. The quiet old man who came in wearing worn-out shoes, was he a nobody, or was he just comfortable with himself? The woman who ordered only a small salad, was she broke, or was she simply not that hungry? The teenager sitting alone in the corner, was he just wasting space, or was he celebrating something in his own way? Trevor realized something life-changing. Everyone has a story, and no one deserves to be treated as less. The next time he stepped into the restaurant, Trevor wasn't the same person anymore. This time, he didn't just serve food, he served respect. And for the first time in his career, he truly understood what it meant to be a great waiter. Trevor woke up the next morning feeling different. Lighter, but also more aware. The events of the previous night still played in his mind like a movie on repeat. The shame, the realization, the unexpected generosity of Shaquille O'Neal. He sat at his tiny apartment's kitchen table, staring at the $5,000 tip. The crisp bills almost felt unreal in his hands. "What am I supposed to do with this?" he thought. His first instinct was to use it for himself, pay off some bills, get a new phone, maybe even treat himself to something fancy. But no matter how many times he tried justifying it, it didn't feel right. This wasn't just money, it was a lesson. A lesson that had cost him his pride, but had given him something even greater in return, a chance to change. Giving back, Trevor spent the next few days reflecting, just as his manager had told him to. He took long walks, sat in coffee shops, and watched the world around him differently. For the first time, he truly saw people. The tired mother trying to calm her crying baby at a diner. The elderly man at the bus stop, struggling to carry his groceries. The homeless woman on the corner, shivering in the cold. And suddenly it clicked. Trevor grabbed his jacket, took the $5,000 and walked out the door. A tip that changed lives. Over the next few days, Trevor did something he had never done before. He gave without expecting anything in return. He paid for a struggling family's meal at a local diner. He handed an envelope of cash to the old man at the bus stop. He bought blankets and warm meals for the homeless in his neighborhood. And with each act, he felt something he had never felt before. Not pride, not superiority, but peace. He had spent so much of his life believing that worth was tied to money, appearance, and power. But in the end, the real power was in kindness. A new Trevor. When Trevor finally returned to work, his co-workers noticed the change immediately. No more arrogance, no more judgment. Instead of rolling his eyes at customers, he greeted them with warmth. Instead of rushing through orders, he took time to listen. Instead of looking down on people, he saw them. His manager pulled him aside one evening. "I don't know what happened to you, but I like it." Trevor smiled. "I just realized what really matters. And from that day on, Trevor wasn't just a waiter anymore. He was a man who had learned the true meaning of respect, kindness, and second chances. The real reward. Months later, as Trevor wiped down a table at the restaurant, he heard a familiar, deep voice behind him. "I see you've changed." He turned around and saw Shaquille O'Neal, smiling. Trevor chuckled, feeling a rush of gratitude. "Yeah, thanks to you." Shaq patted him on the shoulder. "Nah, man, you did the real work." Trevor nodded, knowing those words were true. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't about money, fame, or status. It was about choosing to be better. And that was a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. The end.